All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our post-legislative event. We're so thrilled to see all of you here with us this morning. My name is Rachel Nyman, and I'm the Executive Director at the Brandon Valley Area Chamber of Commerce. And I'm just so grateful to have Senator Colbeck and Representative Cole with us this morning. Representative Sharda could not be here when we scheduled this event. He had another engagement, but he will try to be here around 11 o'clock towards the end when we're finishing up. So if there's something specifically you'd like to visit with him about, he will be coming toward the end of the event today. How our event will work today is if you have questions, please let me know and I can come over there, and you are more than welcome to ask. They can be directed to one or both of our representatives and our senator here, so just let me know. To get started, I do have a couple questions that were submitted to us just to kind of get the ball rolling. One big topic we've seen a lot in the news recently is, of course, the prison. Given the cost and the scale of the proposed prison expansion, what metrics will you use to determine if this investment improves public safety and reduces recidivism? It's a hard word to say.
I'm going to defer to Senator Colbeck on this one. He is serving on the prison committee and has it's almost an inch thick.
Yeah, if anybody wants to go to,
We'll just share a mic.
yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll just share. There we go. So if anybody wants to go to prison, just let me know. We can find a bed for you. So what has happened in 2022, we actually did a study about a new prison, and that's actually when it started. So a lot of the money that's in there is COVID money. It's in the Prison Incarceration Trust Fund, and then the money that was going to be allocated or put over in appropriations this year was actually came from the unclaimed property fund. So that was another 180 million about. So the money to build the prison is there, and none of it is property tax, none of it is sales and use tax. The ongoing funding of the prison will be that. So what happened year over year is they picked a location, and that's the spot down by Harrisburg that probably everybody talks about. In prisons, now that we're looking at those, traditionally the new prisons are all flat. So if you think about right now in the South Dakota State Penitentiary on the Hill, they're at 186% of capacity. So we took a tour of that last week, and they did not change from normal operating procedure. So we were basically walking in general population all day long, and it was probably the biggest thing that I came away with. Two biggest things. One, I can't even describe how it was because I've never been in something like that. Just the mass humanity was crazy. The second thing is that I don't think that the people that we hire to be officers there are safe. So that was probably my two biggest concerns. That's why I think that the hill needs to be abandoned. Right now, there's about 770 inmates in there. So whatever we do, whatever we build, wherever we go, has to at least be that size. And then if we're going to do some expansion, it's going to have to be a little bit bigger than that. So that's where they came up with the 15-bed number, because you're going to have to get probably 800 inmates out of the hill. And then it was built in 1881. There's 2 showers in there. They get to shower 3 times a week. There's a 60-head shower and a 40-head shower. It's 5 stories tall. Those inmates come down 186% of capacity, and it's something to be seen. A lot of the rooms where there are inmates in a space this big, I'm just spitballing here, but if they had a space this big, there's probably 80 men sleeping in the spot this big, maybe even more. A lot of people say that, they did something wrong and they should pay for it, and that's true. That's true. But we also, if we're going to do that, if we're going to make things a felony and we're going to send people to penitentiary and we're going to hire guards, we have a social and economic responsibility to make it safe. And that's kind of where everyone is landing right now. Now, how much that's gonna cost, we're gonna look at that. Where it's gonna be, we're gonna look at that. And then hopefully by July, when we go back into a special session, because it takes 2/3 of the House and the Senate to spend money, hopefully when we go back in July, we'll have a little better plan on that.
Okay. Dave, would you like to add something?
Well,
I'll just add that we have to keep in mind with prisoners that we have in the state, the vast majority of them are gonna be back out. And they're gonna be coming back to our communities, and hopefully, when they do, they can go forth and sin no more, commit no more crimes. Our present system, like Senator alluded to, is way over capacity, and cannot have that. They have a staffing issue up there. It's a terrible place to work. People go in there, they might work for a year, they might work for 2 years, and then they're going off and finding another job. A better facility would probably help with some of that staff turnover. There's been a lot of ideas about where to put the prison. You know, should it be down in Lincoln County? Should it be, 8 different facilities? I've heard one, some people talk about they have facilities all over. Some want it to be down in Springfield, others have mentioned Yankton. The problem with all of that is that you have to have that workforce to draw from in order to make it successful. You have to have that the proper infrastructure in place. So it's kind of a vexing issue, and again, when we had this, it was 825 million. Was what was called a guaranteed maximum price. In other words, if there were cost overruns, the state would not be liable for that. That was going to be up to the contractors. That went off the table on March 31st. So whatever plan comes up, could it be cheaper? Could they find a solution where it's not as much? Perhaps, but prisons are extremely expensive to build. Probably I've read that it's the most costly piece of infrastructure a state will build. And then to manage them also takes a lot. So it's a big issue. We'll have to wait and see what this new report comes out. Another company is doing that. Steve.
There was some false information going around that property taxes would pay for the prison, and that is not true. Property taxes are 100% collected and spent locally. So sales and use tax is what goes into the general fund for the state of South Dakota, and the ongoing expenses would come out of the general fund. And then the budget for the Department of Corrections. But property taxes, your property taxes and mine, or Lincoln County, will not be used. It's not true.
So any questions on, can we take questions now?
Yeah, go for it.
Purpose of stopping.
So, hi there. My question is, so they have money to build a prison, so what's it cost, interest rate, or how's the funding work? The amount of money, and does it cost the state of South Dakota 6%? Is it borrowed money? Can you address that?
Yep.
You see what I'm asking?
Yep, I do. So actually, we're making money on that money. So that was kind of one thing that, as far as a business mind, that money is in, we physically have that money, and it's in the Prison Incarceration Trust Fund. And that trust fund makes around 3%. So you could go outside of that, and you could go into, like the state retirement system actually makes a little more interest. But right now, what we did was we put it what they call below the line. So we balanced our budget, and then we've got this other allocation, this money that we actually physically possess, and that's below the line. And then we'll have to get a 2/3 vote to get that above the line and then spend it.
Might also, you could, thank you.
Might also add that the whole focus of having this money in the incarceration fund is to avoid having to bond the prison, in other words, take out a loan and then pay it off over the years. The mindset was to build this prison, pay it off right away, so that you don't have that ongoing expense of interest payments.
Now I gotta say something about that. So, and we have a AAA credit rating in the state of South Dakota. So if we did, and let's just say we allocate that, we get the 2/3 in July, and we have $800 million, just for round figures, we have $800 million to build a prison. There were some discussions about, could you spend 200 and then leave 600 million in the bank and then make money on that, and then that would help pay your payment. And then after the payments are done, you would still have your principal in the bank. The governor does not want to do that. Governor Noem did not want to do that, and Governor Roden does not want to do that because of what Representative Hull just said, is that if you make a payment and you give out bonds, then that takes away from the general fund. So in other words, general fund, education, all of that kind of stuff that comes out of the general fund, that would suffer. So that's why they want to pay cash for it, be done, and then just do the ongoing expenses of running a new prison, instead of having the ongoing expenses of a new prison and your mortgage payment, basically. That's the logic behind that.
If and when the new prison is built, are there plans to abandon the old prison, do away with it completely, or still operate it?
So there's the Hill, the big Quartzsite building that you can see, and then behind that is the Jameson Annex. One of the buildings in the Jameson Annex is built for 67 people, and they have 169 or 170 people in it. So once the new facility is built, wherever that is, and however that costs, then it would be my vision to abandon the Hill and then take pressure off of Jameson somehow in the new facility. But you're still gonna run that up on the hill, but it's gonna be the Jameson Annex below it. There's been talk of what we do, it was built in 1881. It's a historic building. You keep that was the warden's house, when you come around the curve, that was the warden's house. You tear it down, how much money does it cost to tear it down? We haven't really gotten into any of that, but it's old. We need to get out of there.
If I can ask an unfair question for you, Steve probably focus most. And I get about staffing, having an employment pool. Given that situation, which is a major factor, do you have some of the different options that are there? Lincoln County's obviously one.
Yep.
Is there other ones that could be viable that they're just possibilities at this point, nothing's for sure, that you can see?
Yeah, so yesterday they actually viewed the old Citibank building. That's on 68 acres. And the one thing that kind of was a difference in that is, I don't think people really realize that that's tip-up concrete. So that's pre-stressed tip-up concrete, so it's a really good structure. One thing that could possibly happen is you could change that into what's called the Pheasant Land Industries. So they have wood shop, so they redo pews, and they have an upholstery shop, and they have a metalworking shop, and they have all these they make the license plates. That's all called Pheasant Land Industries. And those buildings are costing us money, just to get the hill up to code and stop the leaks. Not upgrade anything, it's $109 million. Because when we were walking through, there was those rainy days last week, and there was water dripping in the tunnels, and it leaks, the whole thing leaks. It's just, I can't even hardly describe it, but, so that would possibly, maybe we could do that. We don't know yet how much that's gonna cost, but that's one option. Recidivism, that was brought up, we don't want people to go back. So one of the best things to prevent recidivism is family. Is that the family can come, so right now we have a situation where Pine Ridge, North Rapid, we've got some inmates from there, a lot of them. And then they come and their family has to drive 6 hours and then they have to wait, and then they get to talk to them for an hour and then they drive home. Well, the theory is maybe we should have a facility in Rapid and one in Sioux Falls. So, and just as Representative Cole mentioned, I mean, if you're gonna, just to watch the front door is 4 FTE. So if you build 2 facilities, that's 8 FTE. If you build 3, that's 12. So that's kind of all the matrix and all the money that goes into making those decisions, but like the governor said, everything's on the table. And we have to really, really focus on good programming, and we have to really, really focus on the people who want to get out of there and help them succeed somehow. Or stop them from going in. I mean, we either gotta stop them going in the bottom or come out the top somehow. And we're looking at all that.
Okay, let's switch gears to property taxes. Senate Bill 216 was an act to reduce the growth in the assessed value of owner-occupied property, limiting increases in certain property tax revenues. The question is, how do you think this bill is going to impact the quality of education in the state of South Dakota, and more specifically in our Brandon Valley area school district?
That's a good question, and of course, we don't really know the answer to that. So, this is a bill that probably doesn't affect that many areas around the state. It doesn't affect ours as far as the school district goes. It affects definitely Lincoln County, where they've got Harrisburg and T with a growing population. And I wish I had a flow chart on how that goes. So right now, you know, with everything that you have, everything that exists right now, the revenues can increase by a maximum of 3% or CPI. And CPI, you know, goes up and down. It's been, you know, 1.25, it's been, you know, 4. And so for the city of Brandon, for example, with everything that's built today, if the inflation rate is higher than 3%, we can increase the revenues by 3%, no more than that. And then you have the growth on the other side of it. So if you have, someone got a phone on? Okay. There you go. So then you have the growth. So, yeah. And growth would be like what we have across the Aspen Ridge. The houses, the apartments, and things that are, you know, so that's growth that you get additional to that 3% increase. You can get that growth. Right now, that growth would be limited to 3, a maximum of 3%. So if you have a city that's growing at 8%, it's going to impact the revenues that come in. With growth, I have to say there's infrastructure that needs to be taken care of. There's, you have increased costs, you have more streets to maintain, and so staffing can be an issue. The Sioux Falls, you know, they're always looking at their public safety, their fire departments. Are they going to have to build more fire departments? Are they going to have to hire more firefighters? Police officers are also an issue. And if you limit that growth, that can eventually catch up to you. And then that growth is also compounded every year. You lose a little bit of ground on that. Now, this bill is set for 5 years, and then it's supposed to sunset. It could end up, you know, being changed during that 5 years if we see problems with that. The school district, I was talking with Superintendent Larson and then Paul Lundberg, who does our finance field. The school district is growing at around 10% a year. It's growing faster than the city of Brandon. It's growing faster than the city of Sioux Falls. And that's because all of that housing that you see on the east side of Sioux Falls, and then what we see going up in Brandon, it's bringing people in, it's bringing families in, it's bringing kids in at a faster rate than the school district can necessarily keep up with. And they have to accommodate for that. Harrisburg is in probably potentially a worse situation because they're growing at 10 to 14% in the school district. And I think the city of Harrisburg, percentage-wise, is probably growing. So it's gonna impact them. Is it gonna impact Clark County? No. You know, Clark County isn't growing. And so many other counties around the state. So I think they had it figured out that it really impacts about 5 counties. Minnehaha, Lincoln, Pennington, Lawrence, and Custer, I think is the list that I've got that will be impacted by that, so. I don't know if that answers that question. I'm gonna turn it over to the good senator.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so, there was a senator that actually sent her Lincoln County bill, and one thing that we struggle with is, our school board and our school, Brandon Valley School, one, they test very high, and two, they've been very fiscally conservative. So when we go to peer, I don't wanna say we get lumped in, but there are some other school districts where the property taxes are getting out of hand. So here's one example. If you live in the Harrisburg School District, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different assessments on your property tax bill. So when we get ours, it says Brandon Valley School, and that's pretty much it. So they have the school district first one, which on this person's bill is about $5,000, and then they have the bond series from 2023, a bond series from 2021, a bond series from 2019, another bond series from 2019, another bond series from 2017, another bond series from 2016, and another one from 2017. So that's where a lot of the consternation comes from, is that those larger, faster growing school districts have a lot of bond issues, and then in Sioux Falls, they feel like there's a hard, it's very hard to change that ship because that's such a larger and more money. So, there is concern about property taxes. A lot of people say paying rent to the governor, I'm paying rent every month, to live in my own house, it's paid for. Sometimes we're getting up around $10,000 to $11,000 a year in property taxes. So I think a couple of the things that were brought up is a sales tax. The governor kind of floated another penny sales tax, I think. Yeah, county sales tax. I don't think you can do city sales tax because then that messes with the streamlined sales tax. And the streamlined sales tax is like if you order something on Amazon and you get paid tax and then they remit back and forth. So that streamlined sales tax, you gotta be very careful with that. Sales and use tax, if we went to that, a lot of people are like, I go up to Minneapolis and I rent a hotel room and I get taxed, well, why aren't we taxing them as much as they tax us? That's another kind of an argument. And then I think in my mind, the solution is probably a hybrid. If we can control a raise in the sales tax and try to keep our property taxes down, that might be a solution. Then a lot of people kind of confuse the whole thing about school funding is the problem. So not necessarily schools spending too much money or being overfunded, it's the way we fund schools. We fund schools solely on property taxes. So then, with a changing dynamic and a changing demographic, a lot more people live in apartments, a lot of people raise families and things that maybe they don't own that, maybe they rent. It's hard to buy a home. You're 26 to 35-year-old person. It's hard to have a house. It's hard to have a home payment. So those property taxes, those people who have kids in school aren't necessarily paying 100% like someone who owns a home. So all of that's on the table, but it was very, very loud, very vocal, very harsh at times, but, there was a very clear message that property taxes need to be looked at and lowered.
Another bill that was kind of considered was 1019, and that was a bill that originally started with Representative Van Huysen, who is now our Lieutenant Governor. And what that bill would have done would have been raising the sales tax to 5%, funneling that money into schools funding, and which would have the effect of estimated at $417 per every $100,000 of valuation would be reduced. So on a $300,000 valuation, your taxes would go down by, roughly $1,250 on your property tax. On the reverse side of that, you have to kind of figure that, you're gonna be paying another 0.08% on sales tax. So your actual savings, I did the math on mine, and my actual savings probably would have been about $700 to $800, depending on how much I spent during the year. One of the problems that I had with that bill was, anybody in this room rent? Do you rent? We have a lot of people, and I knew we had at least one. So part of the theory there is that if you rent, you don't get that tax break. You don't, because the tax break would not come back on rental property. So renters would actually be subsidizing some of the savings that I would have on my property taxes. I'm one that I don't complain about my property taxes. I just pay them. I know what the money goes for. The biggest problem I have is that money is being wasted, and that could be an issue. We need taxes. We need taxes in order to maintain our roads. We need taxes for the schools, and that's a good thing. Now, the bill that was talked about that might be coming up at some point would be to allow counties to enact a 0.5% or a 5%, 0.5% tax, half penny tax within those counties. And that sounds, at first blush, okay, that would help out counties. It would really help out, and it's got to be passed by the electorate. The electorate has to agree to it, and that would work out real well for Minnehaha County. Probably not so well for Turner County, Lincoln County. A lot of people down there shop in Sioux Falls, so Minnehaha County would make bank on it. A lot of the smaller counties, if you don't have a huge retail service in your community, then that tax money is going to go to the neighboring county, the Watertowns, the Brookings, the Mitchells, Pennington County. So you had something to add?
I was just gonna say, we need to be very cognizant that we just voted on trying to get the sales tax off of food. So if we do any sales tax change, that's gonna have to be addressed. I mean, you can't, it's really hard to argue that it's not a regressive tax. It hurts the lowest of the incomes the worst anytime you raise a sales and use tax. So you really have to address that too, if you're gonna go that way.
So I sit on city council, as does Dave, so we get about 20% of the property tax. County gets about 20 and the school gets about 60. And, we work really hard to make sure that our budget is as tight as possible. And my personal frustration is that when we're in Peter, if you say the word tax, everybody is so scared of taxes. And I understand that some folks have a little bit more difficult time covering those taxes. But as Dave said, we've got to have money to operate. And there is a process where if, say, an elderly person is really in a jam, with their property taxes, there is an abatement process. There is a way to get some help on your property taxes. So if you have some friends that are looking for that, it comes through the county assessor. We approve it at the city council level, and that reduces their taxes. So there are mechanisms out there to try to help the folks that really do need help. But, you know, we don't have an income tax, and our son lives in Minnesota. 7% comes off the top. And so I think that our tax rate, we tend to think it's high. I don't really think it is. So I would just hope that our legislators are cognizant, and I know ours are, that municipalities and counties have to have some money to run. Otherwise, our roads are not gonna get plowed, we're gonna have to reduce police, and our parks will not be kept up.
Thank you, Barb. Okay.
Right up here, there are a couple of questions,
I was just telling you were forgetting about Bart.
Oh.
But since I got the mic, I'll go on. I actually was on city council, one with Steve. In fact, Bart took my spot when I left. Told me if I wanted to stay, she wouldn't run. I said, no, I don't want that. I am kidding. The one thing that always bothered me, and Bart makes a very good point. We're not a state where we have state income tax. So that offsets dramatically. One thing that always bothered me though, when I was on city council, and I'm just gonna say, and I had a lot of good friends being on, you know, Brandon teachers, is, and it was about the same, the school district was getting three times what the city was getting, and that's because years ago, there was a freeze. And we were at an all-time low. Our forefathers said, let's keep it low. Then they froze it. Then the school district comes along and they just keep raising it. But what's always bothered me, and Barb, you just said it, and Steve, you witnessed it, and so did you, Dave, is that as a city, we've always run a tight budget. We're very responsible with the dollars to make sure that we've got unobligated funds should something happen, like the year that Harrisburg ran out of money to remove snow. That's a bad deal. They were up to their butts in it and we were clean. But, just saying like it is. I've always been a little bothered by the school district getting all the money they get, and then I don't think they run their budget as tight. I really don't. They move on because they know they can get more money. And I think they need to be fiscally responsible. Personally, I pay $630 a month in taxes. And because I choose to have a bigger house. I've always had a hard time with that too. Because the guy down the street's got a smaller house, and he's got a boat, he's got an RV, he's got all this stuff, and he's paying half the taxes that I am. Because I choose to spend my money on a house. Pardon me, but I'm gonna say this, I think that's bullshit. So, that's all I got.
Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit here to Medicare. There was a Medicare expansion that was passed in previous legislation. With all the federal budget cuts, how do you foresee the South Dakota legislature funding this expansion in the future?
Medicaid.
Oh, Medicaid.
Mr. Erickson, wanna answer this one? No? You know, that's, I can't remember where that bill went. Yeah, we had a bill on if, yeah, if you can look it up, if the federal coverage was reduced, state coverage would have to, go up as it currently says, and this was a bill to slow that down. Anytime you do that though, I know that, you know, places like care facilities, which we're at, they have to make up that money somewhere. So if the Medicaid reimbursement is lowered for places like Bethany, I have an aunt up in Esmeline at the care center there, and she's a self-pay. So the self-pay goes up. If we don't have 100% going to cover that, then what happens is that the self-pay, those people have to pay more. I see some heads shaking here. And that can be an issue. How that's gonna play out with everything that's going on with DOGE and on the federal side, we don't know. And we're probably gonna have to cross that bridge when it gets there, but we have to make sure that we take care of our people and take care of our facilities so that those facilities are there, they're viable. There he is, he's just walking around.
We're talking about Medicaid.
No, well, you found the right guy.
Yeah. We were just talking about if reimbursement goes down, then self-pay goes up.
Absolutely, yes, without question. As much as I don't want to rely on Medicaid and that kind of reimbursement, it's a fact of life. It is where we are as far as the senior living facility. And so you're spot on. That goes down, everything else goes up. Because we have, right now, the reimbursement that we get pays for the care of our people. So if we have facility updates and those types of things that are necessary, where does that money come from? Which is my job. I'm the foundation director here at Bethany Lutheran Home. And so that's where we try to bridge that gap. And it becomes increasingly difficult because the competition for nonprofits is enormous, but it's where we are, and so this is a fact of life, and so we do not want those reimbursement payments to go down.
And Jim, have you seen federal budget cuts affect Bethany Meadows here, Bethany Lutheran?
I am not privy to that type of information. I would say that it has always been a struggle, and that is something that, the South Dakota Healthcare Association lobbies for organizations like ours because we need somebody in the fight, or somebody at least to voice for us, and that's how that works.
I would just mention, on that piece of paper, Representative Sharp gives a good answer on that about Medicare. Every 10% of the government lowers is $36 million to our general fund. So that's our sales and use tax general fund, $36 million will have to come out of that. If they go down, which I think they probably will, we're gonna have to come up with that money somehow. So that pot, that general fund pot, that's education, that's everything. That's the ongoing expenses of the prison, state library, all those PBS cuts, that would directly affect that.
And I did find Joint House Resolution 5001, joint resolution proposing and submitting to the voters at the next general election an amendment to the Constitution of the state of South Dakota conditioning the requirement of expanded Medicaid on the level of federal assistance. So that is something to watch for at the next general election that we have. Probably more information. Not prepared to really explain it now, but that did pass and it was enrolled and will be on the ballot in about a year.
Well, I was just gonna mention too, that here at our Brandon facility, or at Bethany, we're about 48% Medicaid. That was a law that was put on Bethany when the facility was built, because we are a nonprofit and they didn't want us catering to full paid residents. So it'll hit us hard down the road.
Was there any talk about reducing the items that don't have to pay sales tax? The sales tax exemption?
Yes, That's a great one, Barb. So the question is, has anyone reviewed the list of items that currently are tax exempt to review to see if maybe some of those things on that list we could start collecting sales tax on?
Yep, so every year when we meet as a session, everybody throws out ideas on what we should study. So those are called summer studies. We already knew that we were gonna do the prison. The governor had appointed people to the prison reset. And then we already knew that we passed a bill to get a conglomeration of people, including the governor's office and retailers and everybody in a room to talk about sales tax. So, and property taxes. So that is gonna be discussed in that subset study. Some numbers that are thrown out is like $1 billion.
Advertising.
Right, yeah. So advertising, they made a run at that and it failed. There's no state in the United States of America that actually taxes advertising, only because it's what they classify as an input cost. And largely, I mean, just phones up, most of it goes to agriculture. So a lot of the sales tax, so anytime you get rid of a sales tax exemption, it's a sales tax increase. So, but it is getting looked at.
Okay, so Senator Colbeck, are you on budget and appropriations? John is, okay. Well, you talked a little bit about the general fund, library services, PBS. How do you determine, now I know that program ended up getting funded. However, people want to know, how do you determine which public services or cultural programs are essential during tight budget years?
Well, there's, in the legislature, there's always a lot of sayings. One of them is the juice worth the squeeze, we're making sausage, all of these types of things. So, I'll probably just give you an example. I have a regret for voting for a bill that was part of when we go to caucus, we talk about what's gonna be on the floor. And then our appropriators are kind of trying to make deals with the House, and I'm just speaking for the Senate, but it goes both ways. So we're trying to figure out where the money's gonna be and what we're gonna fund. So we actually will like list our priorities, and then they hand them in, and then it's like, well, the caucus, 80% of the caucus says that we should save PBS, or 20% says that we should save PBS, or something like that. So that's kind of how that direction goes. And then those bills come out of joint appropriations, and then they come to the floor. Well, my regret is voting to increase the cost for the credit, for the high school dual credit program, because that hurt low-income families who want to go to college. But the reason I voted yes on that bill was because it was supposed to, that $1 million was supposed to fill a hole in something else that the caucus wanted. So sometimes you gotta be a team player and try to get everything resolved, because we have to pass these bills with 2/3. So there isn't, in the Senate, there's only 35 members, so there's only like 10 votes to lose. So that was part of it. Well, the reason I regret my vote is because it changed. So that $1 million didn't really go to where we thought it was gonna go to, and then something else came up. It went to a good cause, it did, but it went to community service providers, which would be like Lifescape and something like that. So it's not like it was wasted or anything, it's just, I thought it was important to make sure that college education and college credits were good to go, and someone else thought that it was more important to fund Lifescape. I mean, the caucus as a whole kind of went that way. So we don't really have our finger on that button. All we can do is hope and kind of make our argument. I fought really, really, really hard for airports this year. I thought that as a business person, anytime you can make 4-to-1 money, sometimes 9-to-1 money, that we should invest in the airports, and that's federal money that comes. And there's two different pots. So there's an ongoing spending pot, and then there's a one-time funding. So we end up with one-time funding, and that's like the unclaimed property, or we got some money from something else, or COVID money. You can plop it in there, and you can fill a hole, or you can spend it one time. And that's what I wanted the airport money to be, because airports normally are like a 4-to-1 match. So if we would've stuck 10 million in there, where you got 40 million with the infrastructure, we could've raised more sales tax, we could've, all of that stuff would've compounded. The caucus didn't agree, we lost by about 3 votes. So it's, you kinda get out there, you get a passion, you try to make the right decisions, and again, you have to kinda be a team player sometimes when it's time to get that push, and this is our package, this is what our caucus voted on, this is our priorities. And you just gotta kinda hope for the best. But as far as me, John's in a different position because he's an appropriator. He would be able to do a thumbs up or thumbs down on that specific issue. Someone who's not on appropriations, we just have to vote for the bill.
David, you'd like to add anything?
I think we're good.
Okay. Okay, so, and I know this question was submitted, probably leans more toward Representative Sharda, but of course, people are still talking about the carbon pipelines, and so just wondering, how do you balance economic development with the concerns from farmers and ranchers along the proposed route?
I'll start. 1052 passed, I think it was a terrible bill, I voted against it. I vote no on it every time, only because that bill said that everybody in the room can do something except you. That's what I don't like about it. Not that anybody was mistreated, not that I'm for carbon pipelines, against carbon pipelines. I just don't like that bill because of that bid. So, I don't think it's a good way to govern, I don't think it's a good way to make, legislation, make sausage, as they say. So that's why I voted no on that. A lot of the stuff that plays out in the Public Utilities Commission, and I'm former chairman on the South Dakota PUC, a lot of that stuff, like the environmental impact study and all that stuff is done in the hearing. You can see it going on right now. There was actually another meeting on Thursday that they were talking about it. So I think a lot of that should have been handled in that arena, inside the Public Utilities Commission, in the courts. I don't think that the legislature, a temporary legislature, should be making and passing bills like that. Because in 2 years, if it switches, first thing they do, maybe they change that. That's why I don't like that. You can also kind of compare that to, in my mind, is the marijuana oversight committee. The legislature, which I think is wrong, makes decisions on whether like veterans with PTSD can use marijuana. That's not me, as a flash in the pan temporary legislator, to decide if someone should be able to do that with medical marijuana. That's a Department of Health decision. I think that the carbon pipeline, that's a legal, that should be in the law. That shouldn't be on a temporary populist type basis of the legislature. And if we're really concerned about safety and all of that, then we should have passed a bill to get rid of amusement parks in South Dakota, because there's been more people killed in amusement park accidents than they're having carbon pipelines, so. I definitely have an opinion on that one, but I'll try to stop there.
I was also opposed to 1052, and for a number of reasons. I would have been more comfortable if there had been a metric set that, you know, if the pipeline company got 90% or even 95%, could they impose or utilize eminent domain after that? You know, there's talking points that Representatives Sharda put down on that. Said that there were a lot of landowners been fighting, the landowners have been fighting very hard to get this ability for over 3 years. And when he says the landowners, it kind of implies that all of them. There were a number of landowners, corn producers, that showed up in here, and they're concerned about, without the pipeline, what happens to the ethanol plants. And the answer to that is, I don't know. I don't know if if this is gonna hurt their business model, if they're gonna have a product that they can put out there. I know that probably the Gevo plant up in Lake Preston is on, at best on life support, and, I don't anticipate that they're gonna be building that plant up there. That's a $1.5 billion investment, I think around 200 jobs. You know, if we come out of this and the ethanol industry is viable and they continue to buy the corn that is produced in the state, you know, that'd be fine. But I'm not one that bought into the new Green Deal. A lot of people think that I did. I didn't. But the most logical, strongest argument for this pipeline is addressing the market. And what's that market gonna do? The jury is out on that. You know, the future will tell us what happens there.
I would just, you mentioned economic development. I would say that people do watch, large companies do watch that. Summit had put out over $73 million in easements, and they're gone. If they don't build it, that's money they'll never get back. So people pay attention to that.
Early on in this discussion, there was a lot of talk about safety, and we weren't allowed to, at the county level, say anything about safety, because it wasn't our place to say it. And we found out since that it is local control that can say something about that. I just want you to be aware, in 2017, Archer Daniels Midland, on their own property in Illinois, it's Illinois or Indiana, put in 4 test wells for sequestration, made of the same material that is gonna go across South Dakota if this is allowed. Last spring, about a year ago, first well started leaking. They didn't report it to the EPA until the EPA found out about it in, I think it was June or something like that. Of course, they got fined. In August last year, the second well started leaking. They've since canceled their Wolf product, their Wolf pipeline, and has said that pipeline sequestration or pumping isn't economically feasible. And I really don't think we should be getting involved with it, period.
And that's probably true, but that doesn't mean that 1052 was a good bill. I mean, that was, it all could be handled in the courts, and it was being handled in the courts. So, I mean, if it's dead, the project is dead, so. I don't think that, I mean, we could have passed 1052 or not, but the Supreme Court had already said that they weren't a common carrier, so they didn't have eminent domain anyway. So the PUC hadn't given a permit. Right now, they're pulling their permit. They have 12 days to come up with a new route. That happened last Thursday. All of those things were happening without 1052. That's my point.
One of my concerns is how much our tax dollars go to place that pipeline. Do you guys know what the cost is that it's the present company, not the future companies, but that the present companies will receive in dollars from the federal government to do that?
So if I understand your question, it would be like at the end of the lifetime?
Well, in 13 years, those are the numbers I've always heard. It's just that they'll receive billions of dollars of our tax money. And is our economic development always based on tax dollars, that our tax dollars go to pay to somebody else to make money? And I'm not that well versed in it, but I think that's a huge deal.
Carbon credits.
Oh, the carbon credits. Yeah.
The carbon credits, yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, the carbon credits, yeah, I'm not up on the carbon credits. I know that, like a nuclear power plant gets tax credits too.
But, so we talk about not having enough where our whole country is, and now we're trying to pay to put this pipeline in. It will still cost the government money. And and nobody seems to worry about that. GEVO, they received money from the state of South Dakota, didn't they? They did, the governor didn't give them any money? Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Who's next, Dan or Amanda?
I don't know if GEVO got any, go-ahead money for their initial stuff. I do know that Lake Preston, and might have played a part of it. They've got some, grant money to improve their streets, their water, sewer, number of infrastructure projects that took place in Lake Preston where the GEVO plant was going to go, and did they get favor on that because of the potential of a GEVO plant and, the potential increase in workforce? But they received millions of dollars, and of course, a lot of communities get that money also for, the ARPA money that came in. We benefited from that also. The whole tax credit thing is, I'm not totally versed on where that comes. I know that there are some companies that purchase tax credits, others sell tax credits. How much of that is government money, I just don't know. I do know that during the first Trump administration, they left those tax credits and that whole program up and running. What's gonna happen during this administration in regard to that, I don't know how that's gonna impact their administration or how that's gonna affect these plans going forward.
Gentlemen, I'd like to make a point, and in the last 30 years we've been in the legislature, we've had many bills that you have voted all no on 100% of the time from property owner's point of view. And a lot of those different proposals were more compromised, where they included every utility, where they included a 70 to 80%, where there would be eminent domain could be applied. So you're trying to have your cake and eat it too, when you say that 1052 is a bad bill, because that's what we could pass. And when you take a look at making sausage, and it's right to get federal government money for airports, but then how is it right that you have an out-of-state company with backing from Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and those type of people that have already defrauded the government not only once but twice? It's a little hard to say that you're sincere about protecting the people of District 2. That is my point.
So that, I mean, 1052, the eminent domain bill, is already in law. So if you're not a common carrier, anybody's a common carrier. If you're not a common carrier, then you do not have eminent domain powers, okay? So they have already been determined to not be, and it's all a moot point, because the project did. I mean, it's not coming. So if they do anything, they'll probably go around to Wyoming or they'll go through Minnesota. But they're probably not coming through South Dakota. So it's all moot. My only thing is that if you wanted to get rid of eminent domain powers for common carriers, then get rid of them all. I never had a chance to vote on a lot of those bills. They died in the House last year. So 1052, I think it was a bad bill only because it says everybody can farm as long as you play by the rules except RJ. That's all I'm saying.
Did you listen to the PUC hearing the other day? They,
On Thursday?
yeah, that, the 1052 is not law yet, not until July 1st.
It's not.
And, you just said it was, but it's not. And
I'm sorry, the bill's been signed, but it goes into effect July
correct.
1st.
There is a chance of a referendum that came up in that meeting, that it could go to the election.
Right.
So, I wonder if we've talked before, but did you guys read 1052 before you voted on it? It has nothing about stopping the pipeline. Just prohibit the exercise of eminent domain for a pipeline that carries carbon monoxide. It's got nothing to do with stopping the pipeline. And that's all. We're protecting eminent domain. We didn't stop the pipeline.
Correct. And if they're a common carrier, they would be able to use that, but they can't. So the bill wouldn't do anything, is what you're saying? Because they don't have eminent domain powers right now, because they're not a common carrier.
So, Steve, my question to you, I got a couple, so, one, it's,
Speak into the mic.
one, it's a real insult to us, to compare a hazardous CO2 pipeline to an amusement park. I mean, don't even, it's a way different animal, that's one thing. But, Steve, what I'd like, so in your mind, I mean, the issue I have with this, you're picking winners and losers in the private business sector in terms of who's gonna be able to operate and who's not. And so what do you think are some examples? Evidently, you feel hazardous CO2 pipelines should be able to go. What other examples do you think are legitimate where you have one private company or one group of private property owners having control or dominance over the rest of us private property owners? Can you give me some examples in your mind where you think this gets more legitimate?
So I would say that 1052 picked a winner and loser. Because they said that everyone can use eminent domain if you're a common carrier except carbon. That's kind of my whole problem with the bill. Right? Because if you say we're picking winners and losers, you picked one carbon dioxide, you picked that, and said, no, you can't do that. But everybody else who qualifies as a common carrier can. That's all my point is. Well, I guess what my thought is, back up a little bit, it's what gives a private business the right for eminent domain? Any private business. Eminent domain was established at statehood. So we've had eminent domain since we were a state of South Dakota. Because somebody way back then understood that if we're gonna have projects, there's gonna have to be the use of eminent domain, whether it be a road, a bridge, whatever, transmission line, whatever is qualified as a common carrier, which there's a definition of a common carrier in state law. If you qualify, then you can have eminent domain powers. So right now, Summit was told by the South Dakota Supreme Court, they do not have eminent domain power because they are not a common carrier. So they don't have it. So 1052 says the eminent domain pipeline that carries carbon dioxide does not have it. So what you've done is instead of classifying common carriers, which is everybody, let's just pretend, we're all in the room and we're all common carriers, everybody. What we've done is say that everybody who qualifies as a common carrier, except you, is using it. That's my only problem.
I wanna address the
Some of this,
elephant.
I'm just gonna speak one more thing. Some of the bills that came up dealing with this in the past had also impacts on our utility companies. And that's what made it wasn't just focused, it was focused on the carbon pipeline, but it had other impacts on other businesses that we all depend upon. And speaking particularly about your gas line, your oil, your electrical transmission, and there was a bill, I can't remember which one it was, last year that would have also had a real negative effect on those public utilities that we all like our electricity, we all like to be able to turn on the lights, we all like to have natural gas coming across, and that's some of the reasons that I voted against some of those bills. So just a little clarification there.
Just to clarify even further, there's two different sections of law. One is for utilities in eminent domain, one is for common carriers in eminent domain. So a common carrier is defined, this is off the top of my head, but they transport interstate commodity. So, like oil. So the utility company and the road and the biggest user of eminent domain is the state of South Dakota. Build roads, bridges, and whatever they need. So I work for a company that's used eminent domain once in 105 years. So it was a 12-foot by 12-foot piece of property. So that is a different set. We're talking about common carriers that transport interstate. It's two different things.
Okay, I just wanna bring up one thing real quick. And I spoke in depth with David Call, so I know he does his research, I'm sure Steve does too, from what I know about him. And you state that 1052 really doesn't matter, that this, well, it does matter. It matters to a group of over 200 people I know that hired that attorney. These are farmers, like Dan Nelson right here. These guys had to fight the fight for one reason. Now, whether it's safe or not is beside the point. What they proved was that this pipeline did not qualify for eminent domain. Had they not fought that and proved that, they'd be fighting them off their land right now. And the one thing that bothers me, and I like you both, is your job is to represent your people.
And there's a lot of
So
people-
irregardless, Steve, you can play this two ways. But the bottom line is, if they're asked, it's not too much, and you get 200 people coming to you for help. If you don't help them, you're not doing your job.
So there are other people in this district that are for the pipeline. Not everybody's against the pipeline. There are only 12 people left.
Was their land affected?
What's that?
Was their land affected?
There's people that I know that got checks that live in Brandon. Yeah, they signed easements, yes.
They live in Brandon,
They live in Brandon.
not on the farm.
Not on the farm, they live in Brandon.
Okay, well, it was the farmer's land that was gonna get. I'm just saying.
No, I know what you're saying.
And Steve, I was on the council, and what did I do? I represented the public and hired me to do so.
Okay?
We are literally beating a dead horse down to the past. And there were farmers that lived on farms that also lobbied for the pipeline. You know, so there's, you know, it's 6 of one, half dozen other. I've got a number of petitions that were signed by farmers up in around the state that were supportive. So to say that if everybody was opposed to it, yeah, it'd be an easy thing. There are people that are opposed to it, there were people that were for it. We had to go through, we had to make the decisions that we made. 1052 passed. And like I say, I highly doubt that the Summit Carbon will be putting any pipe in the ground. I highly doubt that the Gevo plant will be built up in Lake Preston. And, you know, again, like I say, I expressed my concern about, and I don't know the answer to it. It's the great unknown. Is ethanol going to be able to go forward if they cannot compete on the world market from South Dakota? They'll be able to do it down in Missouri and Kansas and up in North Dakota, but are the South Dakota ethanol plants going to be able to survive this? And that is the great unknown. I don't know. And like I say, we're just going to have to wait and see. 1052 passed, got signed by the governor. You know, that side of the argument won, and so we're going to keep on beating it. You know, we voted the way we voted, and I think we gave the reasons why, and it's time to move on.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, I'm gonna go with the generalized question. Just to give everybody a little bit of, I guess, background. You can think back when the young lady was killed by someone on a jet ski. Did that, I know it was passed out of committee, did that bill go to the floor and become law as far as laws on the water being basically parallel to laws on the land if someone is killed?
I believe it did. I believe that was brought by Casey Crabtree. And it had to do with a death that was up on Lake Madison.
It's exactly who, yes.
Yes, that passed and was seconded. I can double check, but I'm pretty.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for those who are not aware of that bill, it was a bill that was brought to put stricter, I don't know, restrictions on watercrafts on the lake, so.
So there were a lot of changes made to, elections I'm not sure where all of that was coming from, but, I know that our finance officer who runs our elections here in Brandon called, various people to fight that bill. And some of those associations were not in favor of it either. So what's gonna happen is that next year, when we should be having an election in April for the city, it's going to be combined with the one in June, along with the school district. And so when I walk into City Hall, I don't know how they're going to give me my ballot. Because, you know, I'm in the city, but then somebody else might be in the school district. And so what was the impetus, guys, about changing all of those rules? What was driving that force?
Okay, so that was a bill that was put forth by Representative Mortensen from Stanley County. So in Stanley County, we always had the options of tying our elections to either the primary or the general. There again, local control, we opted not to do that. Stanley County did, and the theory is that it increases voter participation in local issues. We just had an election. I was unopposed, so I wasn't on the ballot, but we had two questions that came up for the voters. Second entrance to the Aspen Park, and also a sale of a little bit of parkland, which has to be on there because it's parkland. And we had an 8.66% turnout for that, with just those two issues. In the last primary that we had, I think Indiana County was able to obtain 10% voter turnout. For, you know, there was a lot of, I don't know if it was apathy, laziness. You know, people said that they were too busy. I had one guy that came up to me, oh God, you know, he says, I wanted to vote in that, but I just didn't have time. Well, my response was, you didn't have time for an entire month that you could have voted. I was not in favor of that bill. I think that is one of those local control issues that should have been preserved. You know, when I went to the legislature here 3 years ago, some of the most promising words that I heard on the floor was legislator after legislator stood up and they voiced their support for local control. On the reverse side of that, some of the most disingenuous words that I heard on the floor, mentioned by legislator after legislator, is their support of local control, because when it came down to the votes, so often they voted against local control. You know, in South Dakota, we get offended when the federal government imposes things on us because we want to have state control, and then we turn around and we do the same thing to our counties and our municipalities and our school districts, and I don't like it. Now, in Stanley County, they went with the primary or the general election, and they felt that it worked out real well. I think about the ballots that are going to happen over in Sioux Falls, where you've got a school board ballot. How many different school boards are incorporated in the city of, it just gets confusing. I was disappointed. We will adjust and we'll do it, but I don't think that it's gonna really have an impact on any of that, and if anything, local issues will be buried underneath everything else that's coming up, and people are gonna look at the ballot and say, I have no idea what that's about. Or where that is, the ballot's gonna get longer, and I think it's gonna get a little more confusing. Barb over there, you know, she had a issue here a number of years ago that had a fantastic turnout.
You had to bring that up.
I did. And we had lines and lines of people wanting to get in and vote her idea down. Sound like.
Yeah, very, yeah,
I'm sorry.
I took a beating on that one. I think maybe the saying is if it's not broke, don't fix it. You know, some of that stuff that is working just fine, I just leave it alone. So I was disappointed on that.
And I voted no on that one. That was, so basically, we just had an election here in April. That won't happen. So we just voted on the Aston Park Road, and then there was another issue on there too. That April election won't happen, so that'll be in June. So the problem is that we're gonna have a ballot, if you live in the city of Brandon, but you vote, you know, at the fire station or wherever you're voting, so then you're gonna have to get a ballot, whatever the primary ballot is, and then you're gonna have to get a Brandon ballot, and then you have to keep them straight, and then you're gonna have to do that.
And it's gonna be controlled by the county.
And it's gonna be controlled by the county, not the city. And then there might be a school board election on there, so then you're gonna be like, okay, I'm Brett Carver, then, okay, you take this ballot, and this ballot, and this ballot, and put it in that track. It takes long enough to vote already, so I would agree. I know what they wanted turnout. And whatever our turnout was at the Aspen, but, it'll be interesting the first June that this goes into effect.
I appreciate that you both voted no.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna wrap things up here. We'll take one last question here.
Mine probably pertains more to 1228 environmental study. When the pipeline was gonna go through proposed to go through our place, I had them do the environmental study, and they looked at, okay, there's gonna be 150 feet right along the pipeline that, you know, where they're gonna control that for future, for, you know, being able to do maintenance and repair. The initial dig was 300 feet, but they didn't say anything about potential impact should there be a leak. You know, North Dakota's dealing with an oil leak right now, and I don't know how far that's gone out of the potential environmental study zone that they had, but I guess I'm questioning, shouldn't an environmental impact study have a third layer, like FAMSA just came out this spring with a recommendation that that people shouldn't be living within 2.5 miles either side of a CO2 pipeline of the size that Summit is proposing. Isn't that environmental impact too? Because, you know, if there were to be any major leak, everything in that zone could be destroyed, every living thing.
Yeah, that one did die on the House floor. I don't recall a lot of that. I haven't seen anything on the FEMSA, ruling as far as the 2.5 mile. I think before it was, what was it, 50 feet?
Well,
setbacks, or
yeah,
are you saying that they're saying that setbacks should be 2.5? If setbacks are supposed to be 2.5.
Setback should be at
miles,
least 2.5 miles on either side of the line. That was FAMS's recommendation.
Recommendation or rule?
They can't set safety rules for local, that's for local, but it's their recommendation to local governments that there shouldn't be any.
That should effectively kill any carbon pipelines going
Except for
forward.
President Trump has already pushed it aside. gave it no consideration.
Yeah, I can't speak to it.
Okay. Okay, well, just to, so we're respectful of everyone's time here, we're approaching 11 o'clock, so, Senator Colbeck and Representative Cole, maybe just some final remarks from you, and
No, thank you. It was an interesting session. We'll go back next year. We'll try it again. And there's a lot of things going on. We had lots of new members, so there was a lot of things that we hashed out. One thing like on the prison study, I mean, a lot of folks that didn't really want to vote on the issue, generally were new, so it was new to them, but it wasn't new to the legislature. So there was a little bit of that that's lost, and I think next year will probably be a little more, I don't want to say organized, but you know, people have their sea legs under them, and I think the session will go pretty good. So we saw a lot of different, we saw a litmus test of issues. I mean, there's only, 500 to 700 bills that we look at, whether they get dropped or they don't get dropped, but it was interesting. It was. I mean, we made some good friends. Everybody stayed respectful. There was nothing bad that I can say about any of my Senate colleagues. They've all been wonderful.
I guess I would have to echo some of that. So this year we had 489 bills. Very, very few of them actually made it to the end. Some of them were good bills that possibly were killed. There were some bad bills that were, a lot of bad bills that were killed. And that's kind of the way it is and it should go. It'll be interesting to see what comes around next year. We do have to go back on July 22nd, assuming that the prison task force does complete their study at the tentative date, and we'll possibly have a vote on where that's going to go, if we're going to move forward on that. I anticipate that once again the property tax bills are going to dominate a lot of the conversation that we have. The high side is I think that we won't have to talk about pipelines anymore. And it was the gift that kept on giving for the last 3 years. And there's part of me that is kind of grateful that we won't have to deal with that. On property tax, on taxes in general, I'm going to leave you with just one thought. South Dakota is fortunate in that we have the 7th lowest tax burden in the country. We tend to forget about that. We tend to focus on just, this little part or that little part, but we have the 7th lowest tax burden. And with that, we also have a balanced budget. We have a balanced budget not just on the state level, but on every subdivision of our government subdivisions, the counties, the cities, even the townships. And we gotta kind of keep that in mind. We need to have tax money to do the things that we can't do as individuals. I didn't build the road in front of my house. I don't maintain the road in front of my house. I didn't build the schools, but I sent my kids to the schools. That's the other thing. There's going to be probably, I don't know if we're going to look at more school bills that were coming up. And we have in our Constitution that we will support public schools, public school system. And where the public school system has, I do believe that it has not been good in some states. I would argue that in South Dakota, we've got a pretty good public school system. We definitely have an excellent school system here in Brandon. I will argue that we have one over, Sioux Falls, Harrisburg, T. We've got good teachers, we've got good schools, and we need to keep on financing them so that they don't start sliding backwards. Some people might think that, maybe we're putting a little bit too much in. I've got grandkids in the public school system now, and I think it's very, very important that they do get maintained. Nothing against private schools, nothing against homeschooling, but if we take that pot of money that we have and we start spreading it out, pretty soon, we don't have enough money to adequately support our public schools. And that's where the lion's share of our children and the future of this state, do get their learning. So I think we'll see more of those bills, and looking forward to passing some and killing some. Thank you.
All right, yes. Well, let's give a round of applause for Senator Quebec and everybody involved. Thank you for all that you do for District 2. We really appreciate you, and thank you for sharing your time with us this morning. Also, a big thank